Well, hello and welcome everybody. It's so great to be here with you. I am here with astrologer and physicist Nadia Smirnova-Mierau, and we are going to be talking today about a topic that I know I personally get asked this question quite a bit, and anyone who is studying astrology or interested in astrology, you've probably wondered this. Is it an art? Is it a science? Is it a religion? What is astrology, and can it be classified as a science? And so I can't think of a better person to have explore this topic on the show than Nadia. And Nadia, welcome. I know you've been here with us at Astrology Hub before, but I would love to start, for those of you, the people out there that don't know you, with a little bit about your background. How did you come to be an astrologer and physicist, a combination that you don't hear every day?
Hey, Amanda. Yes, thank you for having me here. And it's a great topic. I love that topic. It's my favorite. So how did I become interested in this topic, and how did it all come about? I'm a physicist and formerly coming from Russia, from Russian nuclear physics world. And I've been surrounded by my colleagues, scientists, and my friends who come from the same school, from the same background. And I was already an astrologer since my early 20s. And I've been doing horoscopes and even psychic readings at the time. And my friends used to ask me, "Oh, why are you doing this? You are a scientist. How can you believe in astrology? Astrology is a female religion," or whatever other names that they would assign to it, pseudoscience. How can you even look in that direction? And at that time, I knew that astrology works. It was very easy to me to see how it works. And I was doing it. I was counseling people based on their charts, and it was fascinating. And I was so bedazzled that people didn't see that it's just so simple. You can just read this compared to what this person is doing, and it's just so easy. But they were asking questions that at the time I couldn't answer. Like, for example, well, you say that the moon affects my emotions, but I don't see how it does. I'm my own person, just because I didn't sleep last night doesn't mean that it's a full moon and it affects me. It doesn't affect me. The moon doesn't affect me. How can you say Mercury affects my way of thinking? It doesn't. So at that time, I just didn't have, I felt it, but I didn't have any kind of mental construct to explain it. And I've been bombarded by these questions all the time. And I, at some point, realized I kind of owe it to them. I kind of owe them this explanation. I know a lot of astrologers who get asked these questions, they choose not to respond. They know their science, their craft, they know their astrology, it works, but they choose to walk away with this, from these skeptics and from these questions. And I strongly felt that I can't walk away from them. I owe it to them. These are my friends. And they were challenging me. And in a good way. They liked me, they loved me. We all were friends. And that's how it started. I started thinking really hard about it. And suddenly I had this epiphany, and I realized how it works. And from that point, that was about 20 years ago, I started writing articles about it. And then eventually it turned into a book, like a framework, sort of like a scientific framework that is now on Amazon, called Physics of Astrology. And my very first article was dedicated to whether astrology is science or not. And the article, my very first article, was entitled, "Is Astrology Art, Science, or Religion?" And as a matter of fact, if you look at my ebooks, then the number one first volume has that title. Is astrology art, science, or religion? And there I discuss and prove to people that it is science. And the way I prove to people that it is science, there are several different ways that I do it. One way is I simply discuss what science is. The first thing is, let's look at the definition of science. And once you read the definition of science that you can find on Wikipedia, then you could see that astrology actually responds to that definition very, very clearly. The science is a body of knowledge, which astrology is. And then the definition leads to a validation, right? A proof. A science is first is a body of knowledge, which is, I apologize. Forgot to turn this off, sorry.
No worries.
So the biggest thing about this science, right, is the scientific validation, sort of a proof. And the way that it's defined in science is that the proof comes from one of two things. One is an experiment, and another one is statistical analysis. And if one of them works, then you can validate certain phenomena that you're working on. Say, for example, say you study biology, right? And you say, okay, the biology is a science because it's a body of knowledge, and we can take one of these trees and experiment with it and put the seed in, and we propose that a tree will grow of certain kind, like a birch, and then we'll see that it does in fact grows into a birch. So therefore we validated our premise. So and statistical method is applied in areas where you can't experiment with things. Like if you want to experiment with gravity, you can drop a ball and a ball will hit the ground. There you go, here's your gravity. However, if you want to experiment with gravity of the moon, you can't, because you can't really drop the moon onto Earth. So, and the same with stars. Stars are way too far and way too inaccessible to experiment with them. So therefore, the entire science of astronomy, for example, is a body of knowledge, and the scientific validation comes from a statistical analysis and sometimes spectrum analysis and all sorts of analysis where you can't really experiment with, you just analyze. So in regards to astrology, what we see if we read astrological scientific magazines that were published by different organizations for years and decades, we find that people do both. They do they do some sort of experiments, but they do a lot of statistical analysis. For example, they say, okay, let's see if I say that for all the athletes, their Mars in their natal chart will be either in first house, 10th house, or 7th house, and then they get the charts of like 100 people and see, in fact, the statistics shows that majority of them will have a Mars in the angular house. So we know David Cochrane likes a lot of statistical analysis, and he's very scientific astrologer. In that respect, there are many articles you can read where you could see how statistical analysis applies in astrology. Can you actually experiment with astrology? You can if you want to, but it might be unethical, but it's the same like in psychology. Psychology is the type of science where sometimes back in the day, psychologists used to experiment with humans, but then it became unethical, so they don't. However, they do conduct statistical analysis as well. So another angle that I explained that astrology is science is the angle of explanation how astrology works from scientific standpoint. So that is a framework that it's an angle how to look at astrology to make it obvious that there is a physical connection between celestial body and us. And I'm surprised that mainstream scientists don't see it, because to me it's just so obvious, right? Gravity, hello? We all gravitationally, gravity is a force, it's a connection. We're gravitationally connected to Earth. We wouldn't be here if there wouldn't be for gravity. We wouldn't be the same, this height, this look with these muscles, if there wouldn't be for gravity that we have. If gravity would be different, our body structure would be different. Our DNA would be different. So gravity is everything to us. And we are not trained to understand gravity. There is a major misunderstanding and confusion about gravity in the mainstream science. But and again, there are different understanding of gravity coming from different generation of physicists. Newton felt that gravity is a force. He has a formula for it, and that formula works because gravity is a force. Then Einstein came along and said gravity is a curvature of space. And in fact, it is a curvature of space. But it's not just a force and a curvature of space, it's all of it. And in fact, if you start looking closer at gravity, you see that gravity is a force and a curvature. It's a vortex, and it's also a wave function. It's an energy wave. And you don't see these words from mainstream science, even though, you kind of hear sometimes them talking about gravity waves coming from supernova that is very hard to detect. And I'm just surprised why we have a gravitational wave coming from the moon. It's because the moon has gravity and it's constantly in motion. It's involved in a dance with Earth. So of course it's a gravitational wave that they're both involved in. It's a gravitational dynamic. It's a wave. It's not just a steady gravity field. And by the way, everywhere that we have a force, we have a field, force field. So everywhere that we have a motion of the source of the force, we have a wave within that field. And why mainstream scientists only talking about some kind of distant wave that is very hard to detect, that's coming from supernova, and they have to, build all this equipment and just sit there like a cat waiting for that wave to come so they can jump at it. It's right there. It's with the moon. It's like with the Mercury. The Earth creates a gravity wave flying around the sun. So yes, we're talking about physics of astrology. And again, things that are obvious to me, they're not obvious to a lot of people. As a matter of fact, I recently visited my dear friend who is a physicist, have been a physicist and still a physicist. So over the years, he's been extreme skeptic towards anything I had to say. So I didn't really talk too much about astrology to him, because every time that I have to bring it up at a party, he would joke and mention something about female religion or whatever. So being a skeptic. So I never really seriously talked about it. And I don't know, maybe it's this interesting 2020 planetary situation that helps people to open up their psyche to something unusual and different. So maybe it's that. But this time around, the dynamic was different. So I was visiting because he was helping to fix my computer, and we had some tea, had some wine, and then we were talking. And I mentioned again, so I'm very much involved in explaining to the astrology community how astrology works from scientific standpoint. And I think I stumbled upon a very interesting way to explain it. And again, this time around, and I mentioned that I made a YouTube video, couple of them, where I have this very innovative physics-related ideas that came to me through my thought process, through my thinking how to explain astrology. But these ideas have a profound angle within the physics. Like, I would love for physicists to evaluate it, to look at it. And I have physicists email to me and being fascinated with my way of looking at this. So he agreed to look at it. He watched 2 of my videos, and suddenly he said, wow, I never thought of astrology that way.
Wow.
Yeah, and I suddenly realized I converted my most tough skeptic friend.
Wow. So can you give us like layman's in a nutshell what those 2 videos say? Like what
Right.
was the thing
So,
that
yeah,
clicked for him?
one of the videos is a video, how does astrology work? It's my main video on my channel, and a 5-minute video, but it basically, I basically explained that, okay, imagine a full moon and a new moon. And on a full moon, imagine yourself in the middle on Earth. The sun and the moon are on 2 other sides of you at the full moon, and they're pulling you apart. So it's by force of gravity. And to experiment, I asked my boyfriend to hold 2 weights and to swing with these 2 weights around his axis. And he did. So I'm showing it on a video how he swings easily because he has 2 weights, he's balanced. And he can swing like that forever. It's very easy to swing like that. And a full moon is famous for people being in the mood to be out and about and staying up late, and they don't want to go to sleep because they have a lot of energy. They're balanced, they have a lot of energy. So now look at the new moon. On a new moon, we have the sun and the moon on one side of you. So I asked my boyfriend to put 2 weights in one hand and try to swing that way. And again, the reason why I'm asking him to swing is because the sun, the moon, and us, we all in this motion, swinging motion. So my boyfriend takes both weights in one hand and trying to swing, and he can't really swing well. He gets tired too quickly, he's out of balance, and he doesn't feel like doing it. So therefore, on the new moon, people don't feel like doing things. And suddenly his frame, where the mind was framed, that frame suddenly shattered, and suddenly he saw it and he said, wow, I've never thought of it that way. You're right. And then he said, you're the most brilliant woman I've ever met. But that was was very nice to hear from him. He is also a fellow nuclear physicist. And then another video has to do with a spectrum of frequencies that we trained to know. And the spectrum that we always get in the books is limited. We have on the lower part, it's the radio waves, and on the higher, it's gamma rays. And, after visible light, each piece of spectrum has its own name. And then we were never educated about what's beyond those boundaries of the spectrum. So I suggest in my small video to look at the lower band of the spectrum that goes beyond the lowest radio frequency. And if you start extending that line and get to lower and lower frequency, then you eventually get to frequencies of the moon, planets, Pluto, stars, and it's a very, very low frequency band. All waves that we experience, radio waves, electromagnetic waves, all the waves that we experience, they're essentially energy waves. And I propose that this spectrum of electromagnetic waves is not limited, but in fact unlimited, and at least on the lower end, that spectrum, because it doesn't have a name, we can call that gravity wave spectrum. Therefore, I propose to bring gravity into the same line of conversation with electromagnetism, and that in fact is a unified field theory that scientists have been struggling with for decades and still do. They have so many different theories, but if you look at the spectrum as an unlimited spectrum, and I don't believe that it is limited in nature, it just can't be. If you look at it as an unlimited spectrum, then you will see that there are frequencies of a very low band. And then I can go further about that these...
Well, I have a question. How do you know that those lower frequencies are the frequencies of the moon and the planets and the stars?
Well, let's look at what frequency is. Frequency is a value that basically is something like a bit per unit of time. So one of the low frequency, which is a hertz, right? 1 hertz, for example, it's a name for the frequency, but say the frequency goes like this. So I can go like this, and I would say this is about 5 waves per minute. That's the frequency.
Okay, if you're listening on the podcast, Nadia is making a motion with her hand that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're saying, this is just for example though, right?
Right, for example, that's a frequency. So okay. We have, say, a frequency of our heart, right? So we have, what's the frequency of the heart? 60 beats per second, right? Oh, no, wait.
Per minute. Per minute?
Per minute, right. So it's about, 1 per second, if I'm correct, right? So we have a heartbeat, which is a frequency. And that's a extremely low frequency. And for whatever reason, scientists do not consider it as a part of electromagnetic spectrum. They consider electromagnetic spectrum starts with, they call it, starts with visible light. So even the radio waves, they called radio waves, but in fact, they're also part of electromagnetic spectrum. So basically there is a spectrum, unlimited spectrum of frequencies. Mm-hmm. It could be 1 beat per second, 2 beats per second, 3 beats per second, 4, 5 beats per second, or per minute, any unit of time and amount of beats, right? So how much time something moves, and it goes up and up to thousands per second, millions per second. Where we get to very high frequencies, then whatever frequency associated with is called, like, I don't know, visible light, for example. So if you go on Google and pull up electromagnetic frequency spectrum, right, they're going to show you which frequency associated with which name of the spectrum. In nature doesn't give names. In nature, this spectrum is smooth. It's just goes from extremely low to the extremely high, but then humans come in and give these segments names and use them for whatever their reasons. So the radio wave is also electromagnetic spectrum. But then a radio wave doesn't just stop there. Then we have extremely low frequencies. Wikipedia talks about extremely low frequencies very little, but we're not educated about them. And Wikipedia says, okay, extremely low frequencies are used in weather signs a little bit, but because they're extremely low, it's very difficult to build this equipment and so. So they're not that broadly studied, which I understand. They're not that broadly studied, even though the entire thing is kind of obvious to me, but I understand when you talk about scientific establishment, if something is hard to study, then nobody is paid scientists to study it. And scientists only study what they paid to study. Only independent scientists, like myself and like some other people I know, are free to study whatever they want.
So Nadia, do you think that the biggest, so basically what you're saying is we can show that the fields essentially of the planets, the moon, that they affect our lives here on Earth.
Exactly.
There's a way to show that. But do you think that the biggest objection is more around the qualities that we assign as astrologers or within astrology to the waves, and so how they affect us specifically?
Interesting. Okay, so let's look at the moon again. So on a full moon, when we have a balanced pool, we are in a mood to do something. So therefore, the balanced gravity moment affects your mood. That state of planets affects your mood. Any type of thoughts and actions that people engage in, thinking, and then they decide to do something, is based on their mood, typically, right? I'm in a mood to go and party tonight. I'm not in a mood to go anywhere. So therefore, I say gravity affects our way of thinking, because the gravitational dynamic puts us in a certain mood, per se, right? So now, moon is the closest to us, and it's pretty strong the way it affects us, and it affects our entire body. And the mood is basically very much associated with our emotional body, with our emotions. A certain type of dynamic or certain type of position between the moon and the sun can put us in a good mood, happy mood, right? And makes us think, okay, we want to do this now. How do other planets come into play? In a very interesting way. Imagine Venus, right? Venus is a little further than the moon. We barely see it, it's far away. Now, the Venus by itself is much bigger than the moon and does a circle in the sun. And it has its own circular pattern, its own frequencies, set of frequencies. One of the frequencies is its orbit, its movement around the sun. Another frequency that it has its movement around Earth with the sun. And also remember that Earth rotates around its axis, so we have another frequency that all planets have in regards to us is 1 per day, because they all going about 1 per day. And then that one goes around the sun once in 45 days. So that's another frequency. And then not just that frequency, there is also a shape to how Venus moves. And when it moves that way, in all this complicated way, it actually sends that gravitational effect to everything around, including the moon. So now the moon not only does its own motion, it also being affected by Venus, starts creating additional vibration, and it basically amplifies the message that Venus brings. It amplifies it and delivers it to us already in the amplified form. And that creates that nuance that only Venus gives. And we know Venus, that it's a goddess of love. It's a planet that essentially it's a planet that is responsible for our choice making function of our brain and body, right? Choice making, which means, what do I feel like having? What do I feel like, again, what am I in the mood for, but in the aesthetic way? And if you look at the Venusian path around sun and plot it around so many years, you're going to see a Venus star that we're familiar with, right? That is very beautiful. And then we can look at some plants and flowers that grow on Earth, and they would have that same shape. So we can look at it and understand that this particular dynamic of Venus with this particular vibration, with the set of vibrations, set of frequencies that it's creating there, it affects us in a way that we drawn to certain aesthetics. And for each different person, they're born with Venus in Pisces or Venus in Aries. All these segments of the sky will give a slightly different flavor to how you choose things. You know what I mean? And then you can do the same, draw a parallel with Mars, with Pluto. Mars has very aggressive elliptical orbit. It's a warrior planet, right? But essentially, it creates this aggressive dynamic swinging on this elliptical orbit, and in a way it trains our muscles because it gives us a run for our money. So it's responsible for our muscles and for physical way of being, for our go-getter skills, right? It's all because of that orbit and that angle.
Okay, so basically you're saying each planet has its own set of characteristics that affect the field, that then gets amplified as it comes by the moon,
and by the
sun. And the sun. Okay, it gets amplified as it comes into our field, essentially, and then we're influenced by those different fields, those different magnetic fields that have different flavors based on the planet, its orbit, its speed, its position, etc.
And we ourselves are human antennas that receive these vibratory messages and translate them into moods to act, and essentially into actions.
I mean, it makes sense to me as well. I know we're both very biased, but it makes sense. It makes sense. And obviously we've experienced it in our lives and we see it happening. So like, for example, last night I went outside, and I've been doing this a lot, and looked at Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto. And I mean, I can't see Pluto, but I know it's there. And so seeing them in the sky in that very specific position, knowing that their frequency is creating quite a situation here on the planet right now. I mean, essentially, so I'm thinking about your boyfriend again with the weights.
Right.
How would you use that? Could you sort of help us understand scientifically or from electromagnetic field perspective, how those planets and that placement has created the situation we have right now in 2020 on the planet?
I'm glad you asked. This is a perfect question. So the same way as I explained the new moon and the full moon, we're going to apply the same principle with these planets. So remember that what happens with the moon, each time we have a new moon, right? We transition in from the previous loop into the new loop. So each time we say around the new moon, people feel tired, they stay low key, and they prepare for this new cycle. As we're climbing up with the moon to a full moon, right, we're picking up that potential, and around full moon, we're fully potent to do things. Mm-hmm. And we do a lot, and we have a lot of energy to do things. And then we basically going back to the new moon somewhere halfway, we are harvesting whatever we've done on the full moon, and then we basically getting tired of this particular theme. And after the new moon, we getting ready for the bright new day, new lunar months, and a new theme. So the point of a lunar and solar conjunction, which is a new moon, is always a point of renewal of energy, the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new one. The same exact thing is happening between three planets that we have on the sky right now, which is Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. They're in conjunction, which means it's the end. And because we have three planets and one of them is extremely low frequency, which is Pluto, because we have three of them conjunct, it's the end into a major, major, major cycle, which is extreme, similar to new moon, like on steroids. It basically puts the entire world on hold. Just like around new moon, you're not in the mood doing anything. You sort of riding it through, waiting until you start getting that potential energy, climbing up a little bit. Sometimes I use analogy of a roller coaster. Sometimes we can remove my boyfriend from a picture and think of the lunar movement around the earth and dynamic between moon and sun and the earth as if it's a roller coaster when you're going up and down. When you going down, that's the position of the new moon. That's your low potential but high kinetic energy. Then you're going up, your kinetic energy reduces, but your potential rises to the maximum. At the top, you slow down, so your kinetic energy at minimum, but your potential energy high. And then you start going down fast. So the same thing, identical from standpoint of physics, is happening with the new moon and the full moon, is that motion similar. If you plot it like this, it's going to be a roller coaster. As a matter of fact, as the Earth moving through, the moon is never coming back to the same spot. So it creates a spiral, which is a roller coaster. So the same thing happens with big planets. So when they come together in a conjunction, say we remove the Pluto, we forget the Pluto for a moment, just look at the Saturn and Jupiter. They come together once in 20 years. Right? So 20 years ago, we had a situation also where from business and economics perspective and in personal lives, there was a major change, an end to a huge story, big story that was lost in 20 years prior, and the beginning of a new story for a lot of people, wherever you look. Simple example, it even has to do with households. Simple example, in my boyfriend's house, this year, he's doing major updates of things that he had for 20 years. Suddenly this year, whatever he installed 20 years ago falls apart. The end of life. He just installed a new major, like air conditioning, for example. right? Because he previously installed it for 20 years ago. So simple things like that that you can observe in your household. But now you see we have, and that's what happens around each new moon. We have a tiny sense of renewal. If you notice, if you pay attention, the day before new moon, you feel tired and a tiny bit depressed. The day after new moon, you feel like it's morning. The same thing happens with just simple day and night. And the evening you're tired, because we also have a simple, similar dynamic that has to do with Earth rotating around its axis. Every day in the evening, we feel tired. In the morning, we feel renewed, right? So the same thing with the moon and the sun, the same thing with the Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter, and Pluto joins in on that conjunction. That never happens, and since the beginning of time, right? So it's a huge major cycle. So now that they're together, the entire year where they kind of move back and forth together in this grouping, what's happening this year is we waiting. What's going to happen? We're not sure what we're doing. Only when they finally make the final pass and Jupiter and Saturn are on the other side of the Pluto and Jupiter is on the other side of Saturn and finally moves forward, that's when we feel it's a brand new day or brand new, and then it's going to be a certain way for a long time.
And that's starting in December, correct?
Right. It's a critical year, 2020. It's a critical year where things are ending. Look how many things or businesses and people's lives and people's relationships are ending. I find that this year, a lot of relationships fall apart or people get married.
I think that's the high, I saw somewhere it was the highest divorce rate ever this year.
Divorces and marriages, which is very interesting because this year people want to make a major change in their relationship. A lot of people remodeling their homes. They want to make this new. They're getting ready for this new big part of life. Some people sell their stuff and buy new places because they want a whole new life. I have people, those clients of mine and friends who have natal Saturn and Jupiter conjunct, for them this year a major change. Nothing like I've seen in my life, right? I don't have that conjunction in my chart, but I have friends and clients who basically everything changes. Relationship falls apart. They move from one place into another, like living quarters change. One friend, even her car broke down. She had to buy a new one. So boyfriend gone, apartment gone, business gone, car gone. Everything, she was crying. Everything is falling apart. I said, don't cry because you're going to get everything new.
Yes.
New car, new apartment, new business, and new boyfriend.
Okay. So you're essentially saying we collectively are in a new moon.
Exactly.
There's a new moon cycle, like-ish,
Yeah, I would call it new Jupiter, new Saturn, new Pluto.
Right. But we can relate with the way that the new moon feels. So it's that, but it's longer because these planets have longer cycles. So it's a year.
This is why it makes sense right now to peacefully accept social distancing, because we've been socializing quite excessively. And now we all like in the new moon, we kind of not socializing. Okay, that's okay. We kind of low key and we comply with that because we don't really even feel like socializing that much. But we will feel like socializing soon because guess what? When Jupiter moves into Aquarius, it's going to be fun to socialize at that time. We're going to start we're gonna start picking up that new vibe. Yeah, let's socialize again. It's gonna be fun. So I think in the spring, summer, then we're gonna be past that new moonish state of this planet's energy, and we're gonna feel this new blossoming time when we can blossom in a different way.
Spring, summer, 2021.
Yeah, it's gonna be exactly 2021. It's gonna be exciting.
Okay. So it's like an extended new moon period where we're feeling, and when we think about the new moon, it's an internal time. It's a time where we set intentions. Usually, we vision in what it is we want the next moon cycle to be. So in this case, it'd be visioning in what we want the next, however many years, because you're talking about like a big cycle.
It's also a good time to declutter and cleanse both your physical world, optimize your physical world. Saturn and Jupiter together. Jupiter likes success, Saturn likes everything organized and frugal. So you have to organize everything you had excessive in your life. Organize. Pluto is extremely cleansing planet. So you have to cleanse your stuff, optimize it, and you have to cleanse your soul and release, get rid, and clean on all your emotional clutter, all your emotional baggage. And so you become clean going into this new cycle, because you're going to start accumulating new clutter. So you better be clean now. Yeah.
Wow. It's a very hopeful and practical perspective on what's happening. And Nadia, do you have very many converts in this scientific realm? I mean, I know the one physicist you told the story about, but are there other scientists who are starting to understand and see it?
Yeah, I take one at a time. And
one small victory at a time, right?
Exactly. So I was very flattered when I had a text and phone call from a famous physicist that didn't want me to tell his name publicly ever. So a famous physicist who saw my video on how astrology works complimented me and asked for a reading, but under no circumstances wanted me to ever mention his name. So because it's embarrassing for him in front of his peers that he asked for astrology reading. So yeah, that was, I thought that I used to have to do it myself, face to face, converting people, but now I have a couple of videos out there that do the job for me, and I'm going to make more. Right. I don't think people interested that much in reading books, even though I do see some book sales on Amazon. I'm happy about that. But in this world, people are more visual.
Yeah.
So I'm going to continue trying to deliver this message to people so they know, because these things are obvious. They're exciting. Once you understand, once you see it, how this gravity affects your way of thinking with this moon, then you can't look away. Then you always know.
Right.
And beautiful. It's also calming, because the hardest thing for a human in this life is an idea that the human himself, the person responsible for their choices, and if they make bad choices, then they have regrets for the rest of their life. But if they know that their way of thinking is not their way of thinking, the thoughts don't come from our brain. Our brain translates the messages, but the thoughts come from an external influence upon us. So we live in a conscious universe, conscious planets, and we didn't even talk about that. I have a whole cosmology idea about the origin of planets and conscious life living universe. So all these conscious ideas come into our head, and then it actually analyzes, amplifies it, and puts it into words, into thoughts, into actions. So essentially, whatever people do in life, even though we call it conscious decisions, conscious things that they do, essentially they are fulfilling a certain mission that's not their own. In a way, it's their own, of course, because they're assigned that mission by a conscious external environment, but they're agents of certain cosmic agency that sends them on a mission. If you want to think of it that way, it's very interesting also to look at it from both scientific and spiritual perspective, maybe one day.
Yes. Yeah. I always think of it, I always think of it as like frequency bands of thought forms that, depending on what vibration we're resonating at, we are accessing different bands of thoughts or consciousness.
Exactly.
And so we think that we're thinking them, but we're actually just, they're like thinking through us in a way. This is how I visualize.
Right.
So
what our brains are good at is digesting and analyzing the messages that come to us. And messages come to everybody, but each different brain twists this situation differently. And it's just the same as you have different types of prism. You have one white light coming into several prisms, and each prism will do its own thing with the light. Mm-hmm. Our brain is like this different convoluted prism where light get trapped, and all of the electromagnetic frequencies get into the brain and get analyzed and processed, and we have different configuration in there. So therefore, our view of reality is different. If you hear a couple of different people, how they see reality, each one has their own story, but we live in the same reality. It's magnificent, right? And then you understand that the message and the reality is the same, but each one understands differently.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. And Nadia, I want to thank you for really spearheading this conversation in the scientific world, in the world of physics, for us, because not everybody has the training that you have, or the background that you have, and the language that you have. If people want to watch more of your videos, where can they go?
They can go on YouTube and just search for Nadia Smirnova-Mierau, and they can find my channel, which is Physics of Astrology. I invite everybody to sign up, hit like. It's a topic that is worth spreading. There's a message that is worth spreading, and I'll be posting more. I have some plans for very interesting videos that have to do with, say, my view of the lunar craters. It's a very, very, very alternative and makes a lot more sense to me and to people who I expressed it than a mainstream theory of lunar craters. And yeah, so forth.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming and shedding some light on this topic about astrology and science, and whether or not it is or isn't a science, and then helping us understand the way that the planetary energies influence us, and how that makes sense from a scientific perspective. Thank you.
My pleasure. And thank you, Amanda. Thank you for what you're doing.
Yes, it's my pleasure. Absolutely. And thanks to all of you for being here. If you are interested in getting an update each week that includes some of my notes, so you know how I like to summarize things at the end of these episodes, then you can sign up to get our weekly digest. And in that, you'll see all the different episodes that we did in a week. And you can tune into the ones that are interesting to you. You can just go to astrologyhub.com and put your name and your email in at the very top of the page. And we'll make sure that you are in the loop and you know all the amazing content that's coming out every week. Nadia, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thanks to all of you for being
Pleasure.
here. Thank you for being
Thank
a
you.
part of our community, and thanks for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode.